Welcome to our discussion this morning with Helle Dale, Senior Fellow for Public Diplomacy at the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom at the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Her work focuses on the U.S. government's institutions and programs for strategic outreach to the public of foreign countries, as well as more traditional diplomacy, critical elements in American global leadership and in the war of ideas against violent extremism. She is a media fellow at the Hoover Institution, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and serves on the board of visitors of the Institute on Political Journalism at Georgetown and the board of Center for Free Inquiry at Hanover College in Indiana. And I'm especially excited to have Helle with us today because today is Margaret Thatcher's birthday. And it's so important to remember her life and legacy. I was wondering if you could open up our discussion by talking with me and the women from new chapters around this country around what Margaret Thatcher and her legacy means to you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, first of all. I'm really pleased you chose a wonderful day. Margaret Thatcher is one of my great heroes, so I'm really pleased to be here. And yes, she meant a lot to me because I work at the Heritage Foundation, as you said, at the Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. It's the only center in a foreign country, outside the UK, I should say, that she personally endowed with her own funding. We have been in existence for, I'd say about, well, it must be 15 years. The director of our center, Niall Gardner, worked directly with Mrs. Thatcher and was very instrumental in getting her connected with the Heritage Foundation. As a consequence of this connection, she would visit us at least once a year, sometimes more than that. And many people on our staff had the wonderful pleasure of meeting her. She was an incredibly warm, kind, thoughtful person. Wanted to speak to and make connection with even the youngest members of our staff. She would shake hands with all of us, find out who every single intern was, and made a personal connection. You could really see her blossom when she would enter a room full of young people. It was so inspiring. I remember one particular day I had a chance to shake her hand and tell her how much I admired her, and she looked at me with this very intense look straight in the eye, and she said, "You must always act on what you believe in." And I said, "Oh, yes, ma'am." And it has always stuck with me because it is such great advice. You can't go wrong if you act on your true beliefs. You will always know that you've done your best to do the right thing. And I feel that she did that herself. She didn't act on things because she was a woman or more important than others or for some other reason, but she really followed a principled line of ideological thinking, which she thought was best for the UK and best for the world. And as a consequence, she made a great mark on the world. She really did.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear that personal story about your experience working with her and meeting her. Could you talk about what do you think were Margaret Thatcher's most important diplomatic accomplishments?
Well, I think that clearly was the connection she made with President Ronald Reagan. The two of them saw the world very much in the same fashion, and they formed a friendship and a trust which allowed the United States and the United Kingdom to work together to end the Cold War. Together, they faced the Soviet Union, they faced the threats throughout Eastern and Central Europe that were directed at Western Europe. They formed an alliance which is, I think, unparalleled in modern times. And as a consequence, they were able to deal with Mikhail Gorbachev, who himself was trying to innovate, renovate, upgrade the Soviet Union, which was failing badly. And the two of them, Reagan and Thatcher, worked together also with John Paul II to to strategize and to face a common enemy. And they brought a peaceful end to a period in history that I grew up remembering very well. It was a Cold War, but it still sometimes felt like a war. And Margaret Thatcher had a big part in helping to end it. She was there to steal Ronald Reagan if he ever looked like he was faltering in his dealing with the Soviets. She said, you've got to have spine. Don't ever weaken because you're on the right track. And she did the world a great service. That is undoubtedly, in my mind, the greatest foreign policy accomplishment she had, and really that anyone could have. They saved the world from communism, and they saved it from a war which could have been devastating for all of us.
Well, it seems right now among young people that socialism is coming back in trend, that we're seeing socialist clubs pop up on college campuses. Can you talk a little bit about what Margaret Thatcher did and how she viewed socialism during her time?
Oh, yes. It's an important lesson because when in the 1970s, Britain was governed by a socialist government. It was a Labour government, and they were pretty much running the country into the ground. A lot of industry was nationalized, did not function well, and the labor unions really had a grip on power. Particularly the coal miners were able to almost bring the British economy to its knees, and the Labour government was completely in their pocket. It was not a thriving country at all. It had high levels of poverty, great hopelessness, inner cities devastated. Now, her view was that you had to privatize, you had to let private industry, private ownership take over and re-energize the economy and introduce freedom, but freedom really had been lost. I mean, if you think of Britain, that is the country that had the greatest philosophers on the subject of individual freedom. They pretty much invented the whole thing. Democracy is a British invention, and yet they were throttling it. So when Margaret Thatcher challenged Edward Heath for power in the Conservative Party and was able to win the election in the early 80s, she reversed course for Great Britain, and the result was remarkable. Throughout the 80s, the country saw a renaissance that it really badly needed. And for anyone who has lived through what socialism can do to a country, it is really hard to understand why it is still being idealized. And I think most people who actually have familiarity with the reality of socialism would tell you that that is so much the wrong path to go down. You will lose your freedom. You may think that you will gain some, economic advantages and equality and things. Well, what you're losing is your freedom and your ability to build things in your life for your family, for your community on an individual basis. And it is a tragedy when it happens. Countries throughout the world have tried this and failed because it is not a philosophy that works. So I think the fact that it is coming around on American campuses again is because it sounds so good. There's an idealism to it, which sounds lovely. But once you try it, you realize that what is being taken away, first of all, is your individual ability to act, to think, and to speak, and to build a life for yourself. And most people, once they've been through that mill, will not want to go back there.
Well, thank you for that response. I think that is such an important message for people to hear. And I think it's shocking for those folks who've lived through socialism or really studied it, that it's coming back again, and a real problem. So I'm glad we're getting this message and talking about it today.
Well, it almost feels like every generation has to go through its flirtation with socialism, because there was a deceptive idealism at the root of it, which goes back really to the French Revolution and the French philosophers of the 18th century. And yet, every time it has been tried, it has failed. And when it turns into hardcore communism, it is immensely destructive and devastating for populations and countries to go through. You look at the Soviet Union, you can look at China, you can look at more modern examples like Venezuela, where the devastation is unspeakable. So I just hope that we can avert this and open some minds to really looking at the history of what we're talking about when we talk about socialism.
Oh, thank you. And can you talk a little bit about Margaret Thatcher as a leader? Right now, we've got two very prominent women on the national stage, Senator Harris, who's running for vice president, and Amy Coney Barrett, who's been nominated to the Supreme Court. And it seems to me that the media is treating them differently and that they've got different leadership styles. Could you talk a little bit about Margaret Thatcher's leadership style?
Yes. I think Margaret Thatcher, when as prime minister, I mean, she was the first British woman prime minister ever. She was also the longest serving prime minister of the 20th century in Great Britain. She did not actually consider that to be as important as the fact that she was the first scientist who became a prime minister. She did not play the feminist card. She was not a feminist. She was clearly, in her mind, as capable as any man, and did not necessarily. It wasn't. She didn't say it's my turn because I'm a woman. She didn't say it's my turn because I'm a scientist. She did. She was a very talented, forceful leader, and she was always extremely well prepared. So I think that was her qualification. You know, she went to an all-girls college in Oxford, Somerset College, and clearly thrived in that environment. But her view of herself, I think, was not changed by feminism. She took a lot of heat from the media. She was not a favorite. She went through pretty much what Amy Coney Barrett is going through now, maybe not quite as viciously, but there was the same tone, because she was conservative, because she was forceful, because she was a woman. The Soviets called her the Iron Lady. That was the term they came up with in one of their publications, and she embraced it. She loved it. She was the Iron Lady, and she did not give any quarter when she was dealing with anybody, whether they were, gals or guys. So
yeah, that's a good nickname. That's got to be one of the best historically.
Yes. So I'd say, she left a legacy as in politics as a woman, but it was not really the one she sought. She sought to make a contribution for her country. I would say, though, also that when you look at British history, there is a long tradition of very strong women, going back to Elizabeth I, the longest serving monarch, Queen Victoria, 19th century, Queen Elizabeth II, 20th century. There is a history of women leaders, they're not feminists, but they're strong women. And maybe for that reason, she was able to forge a similar path in British politics. And I'm always delighted to see women who can stand on their own 2 feet and meet any challenge. I certainly think that Amy Coney Barrett can do that. Kamala Harris certainly seems to have a forceful personality. I don't agree with her policies, but I'm glad to see women out there in front. So yeah, we have equals on the political scene and should be.
Well, great. Well, now I'd like to turn, we've got a viewer question that has come in. So I'd like to ask that. It was just texted to me. So what would you say is the takeaway or most inspiring moment that conservative women in Margaret Thatcher's life?
Oh, the most inspiring moment. Well, I mean, I would certainly say that in foreign policy, I was tremendously inspired by the fact that she was able to forge an alliance with Ronald Reagan and confront the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is historical on a world historical level. She was also really forceful in dealing with the media. She was forceful in dealing with her political opponents. She was very articulate, And so, you know, some of her quotes are still ring true, you know, about socialism. Sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. That one is worth remembering these days.
That's a great line, isn't it?
It is, and it's so true.
And we need to hear it more and more.
I think we'll hear it more and more. Yes, I mean, when we think of $1 trillion rolling out the door after the other. So, and yeah, I'd have to say her role in ending the Cold War was phenomenal. But also, she turned the country around. She really did. And I think the Conservative Party, after she was ousted in 1990, really went downhill. She was the heart and soul of the party all through the 1980s.
And now I just had another interesting question come in. So what book do you think best portrays her life and her legacy? And maybe it's a book or a movie. I know we had a movie come out a few years ago on her. What book or movie do you think best shares the true Margaret?
Well, I mean, the movie was a phenomenal movie, and that's absolutely worth watching. My personal favorites were her own 2 volumes of her autobiography. They're pretty big books, but they're very well
They
told.
are.
Yes, and they're definitely worth reading. It's a great story, so I would recommend that to you.
Yeah, reading in her own voice. It's neat to
yes,
hear her view, read her view of things.
Yeah.
Okay, and then had one more come in. What do you think young women should take from her? What would she want young women to know about her and learn from her?
Well, I think what women in general, young women, should take away is, first of all, don't ever be afraid of stepping into a big challenge. And that was what she did. She had faith in herself. Have faith in yourself. You can do it if you're not afraid. And she was not. But she combined that toughness. And I mean, she was tough. And, you know, she survived a bombing attempt. She survived a lot of barbs from the media and the opposition. She never backed down because she believed in what she was doing. But she also combined that, I think, with a tremendous graciousness. And she was very humble as well. She did not act as though she was entitled to your admiration. Having met her personally and seen her, you know, she always had her handbag with her, walk into the kitchen for our staff looking for a glass of water. She was not the kind of person who would say, you know, bring me a glass of water, you know, I'm so important. She'd go looking for the kitchen to find one herself. She would sit down, talk, have tea with us. She would be interested in what you were doing. So, you know, that personal graciousness and that personal humility, I think, is something that you also have to, and you also should have. And that way you win more hearts and minds than in any other way. I would contrast her maybe with another very prominent woman, Hillary Clinton, who, to my mind at least, often would act in a very entitled way. Margaret Thatcher did not act as though she was entitled to be, you know, for you to admire her. But she offered everything she had, and she did it with kindness and with toughness and principle, all those combined.
She had a gravitas about her, didn't she?
She did.
Humble, yeah.
Yes, she felt what she was doing was important, and she really believed in what she was doing, and she set such a great example.
Wonderful. Well, I think that description is something that we could use in more female politicians today, as you mentioned. I think that humility, that toughness and stick to principle that she had, but combining that with the graciousness. So thanks for sharing that with our viewers.
Yes.
I've gotten a couple other questions come in about Margaret Thatcher's relationship with Ronald Reagan. Our students are very interested in that. Could you talk a little bit more about how they work together and how their personalities work together in confronting the Soviet Union?
Right. The two of them had a very interesting friendship. I think it was a very deep friendship, and they really understood each other. You know, both having lived through World War II. Reagan was a bit older. She was in her teens, I think, during the war, or maybe something like that. I mean, she was a little bit younger than him, but the two of them forged a really interesting relationship. They understood each other very well. Sometimes started off a little rocky, if you remember the Falklands War, where the British went to war over the Falkland Islands, which had been invaded by Argentina, and Reagan came out on the other side, and she was as mad as a hatter. There is a wonderful description in one of his biographies of Reagan on the phone. They had not communicated well on this level. She was on the phone with him. He was holding the phone out here basically because she was yelling. And he turned around to his advisors and said something like, "I love it when she's mad." I mean, because she did not mince any words. Later on, but they clearly made up again and understood each other. Later on, she told him when he was dealing with Gorbachev, you know, this is no time to go wobbly. You know, stiffen your spine and deal with them, be tough, because we cannot afford to give up anything to the Soviets. So she would bolster him. And she also had, I think, maybe, well, they had both been in politics for a long time. But she gave him the moral enforcement that he needed and an important European ally. Europeans did not, generally speaking, take a great view of Ronald Reagan. He got the same treatment that George W. Bush did and that Donald Trump has gotten. Europeans tend to look more favorably on democratic presidents. But she was an incredibly important ally, as was Helmut Kohl actually in Germany as well. Yeah, she gave him that foothold in Europe for American policies that was super important. So they had a really close, warm relationship, but she didn't hesitate to yell at him if she needed to.
Well, thank you. It's so fun to listen to you kind of recounting their relationship and reminding us of the history there with the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, it seems very far away, but it really wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't.
I'd love to end by giving you the opportunity to talk more about your work at the Margaret Thatcher Center, at the Heritage Foundation. Could you share a little bit more about your work with our audience?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. So as I said, the Margaret Thatcher Center was established by Margaret Thatcher to help Margaret Thatcher to help promote the principles that she believed in: freedom, individual freedom, free market capitalism, national a national view of the world, which does not embrace international institutions as superior to the national interest of individual countries. And so we have in our center the European countries are sort of primary areas of study, international organizations and their limits of power and their contrast with national interests sometimes. And my own particular work focuses on communication between countries and public diplomacy. How do we reach out to audiences in foreign countries, address them and make them understand the United States better and the principles on which this nation is founded. There is obviously a great commonality of interest and policy between the United States and the United Kingdom. It is our closest ally, and the freedom, the principles on which we are both founded and we share are important to communicate to the world. So that is the area of study that I deal in, State Department, diplomacy, and communication with the world, and the promotion of ideas, which continue to be so tremendously important as we were talking about. Socialism is a set of ideas, and so is free market capitalism, and we're still debating those ideas.
Well, Helle, thank you so much for joining us today on Margaret Thatcher's birthday. It truly has been an honor to discuss with you her life and her legacy. For our viewers, we are continuing to host regular Facebook Lives. You can follow them on the new Facebook page and follow us on Instagram at enlightened women, and you can follow me at karen.lips on Instagram as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.